Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, flower pot men, flower pot men, flower pot men, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, flower pot men.
Once upon a time, there was a little house. And all round the house was a beautiful garden. And down at the bottom of the garden was a place where the man who worked in the garden left his things while he went into the house to have his dinner. One day, when he'd gone into the house to have his dinner, he left behind his scarf and 2 handkerchiefs pegged on a line to dry. And there were the flower pots as usual. 2 little ones, 2 middle-sized ones. Oh, yes, and an old hat lying on the ground. And there were the 2 great big flower pots. And just behind was a little weed. And there they all were, lying quietly in the warm sunshine. The little weed looked all about her, and when she saw that everything was quiet, she knocked gently on one of the big flower pots. And out of the flower pot came a little flower pot man. Then the little weed knocked gently on the other flower pot. And out came the other flower pot man. They leaned over the edge of their flower pots and said hello to each other.
Hot-dog-dip.
Hot-dog-dip.
Then they said hello to the little weed.
Hot-dog-dip-up-weep.
Hot-dog-dip-up-weep.
And they jumped out of their flower pots.
Oh.
Then they looked round for something to play with.
Oh.
There wasn't anything but the old hat the man had left in the garden.
Oh, odd hop.
Odd hop.
And they wondered what they could do with it.
Oh, what a cuddle-doodlip.
Hot top nop.
Then suddenly one of them said, in his flower pot way of talking, I know, let's fill it with water.
Oh, nop. Lodder flip, whip flip.
Gulloop-a-beep.
The other one thought it was a very good idea, because then they could have a bath.
Oh, noddle-cuddle-hopper-splooper-bush.
Splooper-bush.
But first, one of them would have to fetch some water.
Oh, flip-to-flip.
All up.
So the first flower pot man hurried off to get some water, and the other one went on playing with the hat.
Oh.
First he looked inside to see if there was enough room to get in. Then he looked to see if there were any holes in the hat for the water to run out.
Moo. Moo.
But there weren't any holes, and he was getting tired of waiting. So he called out to his friend to hurry up.
Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up.
Oh, up, hop, cop up.
And in came the first flower pot man with a big can of water, all ready to fill up the bath.
Oh, swoosh.
Oh, flip, 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 flip.
Swoosh.
Oh, flip.
Oh, swoosh.
Oh, flip, 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 flip. Oh.
Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Oh, swoosh.
While he was putting the water in, the second flower pot man kept talking to his friend and telling him he'd always wanted to have a bath.
Oh, addle, waddle, hopper, splooper-bush.
Splooper-bush. Oh, plush.
Oh, flip, 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 flip. Oh.
When there was enough water, the second flower pot man said, in his flower pot way of talking, now I can have a bath, but I don't want to get my boots wet.
Another cob, hopper, splooper-bush. Bottle-doodle-bottle-cuddle-feel-a-wall.
No, mother gotta feel bubble.
The first flower pot man wanted to have a bath too, but he said, you You get in first while I put the can away.
All glip up, pull clobber up.
Now everything was ready. And the flower pot man got in very carefully. There he was, sitting in the bath with his feet sticking out. Then he thought he ought to have more water. And while his friend was fetching more water, he started singing in his bath.
Splishy washy wash, splashy washy wash, splashy wash wash, plip. Rub-a-dub-dub, rub-a-lub-lub, splishy wash wash, plip. Splashy wash wash, splashy wash wash, splashy wash wash wash. Splishy wash wash, washy wash wash, rub-a-dub-dub, plip.
Soon the first flower pot man came back with the can and began pouring the water into the bath.
Splush.
And the second flower pot man called out, "Mind my boots." He was very proud of his boots, and he didn't want to get them wet. Then he went on singing while his friend put the can away.
Splashy washy washy, splashy washy wash, washy wash wash, plip. Rub-a-lub-a-lub, rub-a-lub-a-lub, splish wash wash, plip.
When the first flower pot man came back, he wanted to get in. It was his turn now.
Oh, club up, you're my top.
The second flower pot man didn't want to get out. He pretended he hadn't finished washing.
Oh, yup, yup, hop. Oh, yup, yup, hop.
The other one told him he wasn't going to wait any longer. He must come out.
Club up.
While they were arguing, they tipped the hat over, spilt the water, and they both got very wet.
Do plop me.
I plopped up.
And look, his boots were wet.
The hop.
The other flower pot man's boots were wet too.
Oh, blop up top.
How were they to get dry? Then the first flower pot man had an idea, and he pointed to the washing that was drying on the line.
Oh, what a little light.
What a light.
Oh,
Oh.
And they started tugging at the handkerchiefs. And when they got them down, they began to dry their boots.
wop, 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 bloop.
Wop, 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 bloop. Oh.
But their boots were still wet, so they tried to think of something else. And one of them called out, "I know. Let's dry on the line like the washing."
Oh, I'm not. I'd lie, blah, blah.
A light.
So they went over to the scarf hanging up to dry on the line, and they jumped in.
Oh,
Oh, oh, oh, oh, oh, oh, oh.
And while they were swinging their legs to dry, they started singing all over again.
Splush, push, 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 push.
rubber-lubber-lub, rubber-lubber-lub, rubber-lub-lub, flip. rub-a-lub-lub, splish-wash, wash, splishy-wash, wash, flip.
Rub-a-lub-lub, splish-wash, wash, rub-a-lub-lub-lub. Hoo-hoo. Hoo-hoo. Hoo-hoo.
After a while, one of them slipped off and crept away. And what do you think he did? He'd undone the end of the clothesline. All this time, the little weed had been watching, and she knew which of the flower pot men had untied the clothesline. Now listen, because the little weed is going to ask a question.
Was it Bill or was it Ben made his friend fall down just then? Which of those two flower pot men? Was it Bill or was it Ben?
Do you know? You listen again.
Was it Bill or was it Ben made his friend fall down just then? Which of those two flower pot men? Was it Bill or was it Ben?
Was it Bill or was it Ben? It was Bill. It was Bill. Bad little Bill.
Ba-dip-op-dip.
There they both were, looking round at all the things they'd been playing with. They thought the garden looked very untidy,
Oh, idle-oddle-toddle.
Needle-oddle-toddle.
and perhaps they'd better hang up the clothesline again.
Doddle-huddle-up-lipe.
Up.
So one of them held it up, and the other one went off to tie it up.
Oh, 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 I flopped up. Oh,
They shook the scarf to get the mud off,
Oh,
oh, oh,
and then they went over to the hat to see if it was getting dry.
oh, oh, fuddle-oh-hop.
fuddle-hop.
Oh, hop. Oh, it'll drop.
It'll drop.
It'll drop.
Then they both got in
Up.
Up, up,
and started rocking up and down.
Deep, top, muddy little top.
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 They would have gone on playing, but they heard little Weed calling.
Oh,
Oh,
She was telling them that the man who does the garden had finished his dinner, and she heard him coming down the garden path. So they hurried back and jumped into their flower pots again.
oh,
Then they said goodbye to each other.
bow up,
bob,
bow up,
bob,
bow up.
bob,
Then they said goodbye to the little Weed.
Bow up, dip up, weep, weep,
bob, dip up, weep.
weep.
The little Weed stayed behind the flower pots and went fast asleep. And there they were in the warm sunshine. I expect the man who worked in the garden thought the wind had blown the handkerchiefs down. Nobody knew about the flower pot men. Only you saw them playing. And the little Weed. And I think the little house knew something about it. Don't you?
Goodbye, Bill. Goodbye, Ben. Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, flower pot men. Goodbye, Bill. Goodbye, Ben. Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, flower pot men. Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, flower pot men. flower pot men, flower pot men. Bill and Ben, flower pot men.
Once upon a time, there was a little house. And all round the house was a beautiful garden. And down at the bottom of the garden was a place where the man who worked in the garden left his things while he went into the house to have his dinner. One day, when he'd gone into the house to have his dinner, he left behind his little trowel, his big watering can, a string of onions, and a whole lot of cabbages and sprouts he'd been cutting that morning. And there were the flower pots, as they always were. 2 middle-sized ones, 2 little ones, and 2 great big ones. And just behind the big flower pots was a little weed. And there they all were, lying quietly in the warm sunshine. The little weed looked all about her, and when she saw that everything was quiet, she knocked gently on one of the big flower pots and said, "Weed! Weed!" Then the first flower pot man knew it was time to pop up. He leaned over and said, which was the flower pot way of saying, "Hello, little weed, I'm the first flower pot man to pop up." The little weed laughed. "Weed, weed." Then she knocked gently on the other big flower pot. "Weed, weed." But there was no answer.
Oh.
The little weed knocked again. But there was still no answer, and the other little flower pot man didn't come up. Then the first flower pot man leaned over to see why his friend didn't come up, but there was nobody there.
Oh. Da 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 da. Floppa pop pop. Ba ba woo.
Then he asked the little weed if she'd seen him.
Oh, how about he pop? Floppa pop pop.
Weed!
Oh. Did you roll up, but drop? Up, cut out a pot up. Up, what up, he beep.
He looked everywhere for the other flower pot man. He even looked in his own flower pot. He wasn't there.
No.
Then he looked in the other flower pot. He wasn't there either.
Nope. Nope, nope.
Then he looked in the hole where the hens run in and out. He wasn't there. He wasn't anywhere.
No. Not the other.
Then he started calling.
Floppa pop pop. Wah wah woo.
At last he came to the big watering can, and he thought perhaps he might be there. So he stopped and called down the spout, in his flower pot way of talking. "Is anybody there?"
No. Oh.
Of course, the first flower pot man knew he was there because he heard him talking.
Oh, you want to water a crop?
No.
No. Oh. Oh. Water for a crop.
No. No.
Oh. Oh,
No.
oh, come on, Bob. No,
Then they began playing about on the watering can.
Oh.
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 Oh. Up. Oh.
Oh.
Oh. Oh.
Oh, dear, one of them fell in.
Oh, come on. Oh, no, oh, come.
Oh.
Oh, no, don't follow up.
Up.
Then the flower pot men thought they'd like to play horses. One could be the horse, and the other could be the driver.
Oh, beep up, flop. Beep up, wop up.
All up. Oh.
Chip, chip, chip. Ah! Ah! Come up, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Ah!
But they didn't get on very fast, and they wondered if they could find something that went faster. The watering can was a very nice horse to ride on, but it didn't go fast at all. It was even slower than their old friend Slowcoach the tortoise.
Oh, sluggle-dog, sluggle-log.
Sluggle-log, sluggle-log.
So they looked about to find something else to ride on. And they saw those cabbages and sprouts that I told you about, the ones the man who works in the garden had left there when he went into the house to have his dinner. They looked at the sprouts first, but they didn't think they could ride on them because they were far too small to go fast.
Beep up.
No, not too small.
Beep up.
No, call pop.
Beep up.
No, up deep, yubble.
When the little sprouts heard what the flower pot men said, they were very angry, and they jumped up and hurried away, just to show the flower pot men how fast they could run. Then one of the flower pot men said, "What about these cabbages? We could ride on them."
Oh, clobble up.
Lep rob of the clobble. Hop-de-bop.
No, beep up.
No, hop-de-bop.
No, up.
No, hop-de-bop.
Oh, up.
When they had decided who was to have which one, they got on their cabbages and settled themselves down. Then they began to jiggle up and down and say, "Gee up, in their funny flower pot way of talking.
Oh, chup.
Chip.
They jigged about so much that the cabbages began to bounce. First, tiny little bounces,
Oh,
then bigger bounces,
Oh,
and then they bounced higher and higher and higher and higher. They were so busy bouncing up and down on their cabbages that they didn't see that the little sprouts were dancing behind them, copying all they did and doing it all just as fast and just as well. Then one of the flower pot men bounced so high that he bounced right away. The other one went on playing. But because he wasn't looking what he was doing, he fell off. And while he was busy picking himself up, the naughty little sprouts came, and they pushed and pushed, and at last they pushed the cabbage right away. When the flower pot man turned round to look, it wasn't there.
Oh, wap my club up. Eep gob.
And he wondered where it had gone.
Oh, about club up club. Oh, no odd loddle.
And he wondered and wondered and wondered what had happened to the cabbage. He couldn't think where it had gone. He knew the other flower pot man hadn't taken it because he wasn't there. He couldn't think how it had happened at all. And while he was looking for it, the little sprouts pushed the cabbage back again. Then they ran back and jumped into the basket as fast as they could. But the flower pot man didn't know this because he wasn't looking. Now, all this time, the little weed was watching, and she had seen which one had lost his cabbage. You listen, because the little weed is going to ask a question.
Was it Bill or was it Ben? Lost his fine big cabbage then. Which of these two flower pot men? Was it Bill or was it Ben?
Do you know which one it was? You listen again.
Was it Bill or was it Ben? Lost his fine big cabbage then. Which of these two flower pot men? Was it Bill or was it Ben?
Well, was it Ben or was it Bill? It was Bill. It was Bill. And while he was still looking, his friend came back and asked what was the matter. And he told him he'd lost his cabbage. Couldn't find it anywhere.
Ba-la-ba, club up. Cut, flat-a-tat-a-pop.
Klop, slop op. Wat dat er die? Lo.
Oh, mama, patata, 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 patata.
Slop, klop, klop.
So the first flower pot man got back onto his cabbage and they had another ride. And while they were still playing, they heard the little weed calling.
Do, blobble, blobble, blobble.
Oh, blubble, blubble, blubble.
She was telling them to hurry because the man who digs the garden had finished his dinner and she heard him coming down the garden path. So they got off their cabbages and hurried back to their flower pots so they could climb in again.
Oh.
Oh, hey, oh.
Then they said goodbye to each other.
Bob, bob.
Ba-wap,
Bob.
ba-wap.
Then they said goodbye to the little weed.
Bawa, do, weep.
Ba-wap, ata, weep.
The little weed stayed behind the flower pots and went fast asleep. And there they all were in the warm sunshine. But the man who worked in the garden didn't know that anything had happened at all. Nobody knew about the flower pot men. Only you saw them playing. And the little weed. And I think the little house knew something about it. Don't you?
Goodbye, Bill. Goodbye, Ben. Bill and Ben, Bill and Goodbye, Bill. Goodbye, Ben. Bill and Ben, flower pot men. Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, flower pot men, flower pot men, flower pot men, Bill and Ben, flower pot men.
Once upon a time, there was a little house. And all round the house was a beautiful garden. And down at the bottom of the garden was a place where the man who worked in the garden left his things while he went into the house to have his dinner. One day, when he'd gone into the house to have his dinner, he left behind a lot of things. A garden fork, 2 little flower pots, 2 middle-sized ones, and an old pair of bellows. He'd been mending them because he needed them for his kitchen fire. And of course, there were the 2 big flower pots, as usual. And just behind the big flower pots was a little weed. Weed! Weed! And there they all were, lying quietly in the warm sunshine. The little weed looked all about her, and when she saw that everything was quiet, she knocked gently on one of the big flower pots. Weed! Weed! And out of the flower pot came a little flower pot man.
Oh.
He peeped out to see if anyone was there.
Oh.
And he thought he heard someone coming, so he popped down again.
Oh.
Then the little weed knocked gently on the other flower pot. Weed! Weed! And out of the other flower pot came the other flower pot man.
Oh.
He peeped out to see if anyone was there.
Oh.
And he thought he heard someone coming, so he popped down again.
Ow.
After a while, they both came up together.
Oh.
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 They leaned over their flower pots and said hello to each other.
Oh, hot up, bip.
Hot dog, pip.
Then they said hello to the little weed.
Hot up, the pop, beep.
Weed. Hot dog, the pop, weed. Weed.
But instead of getting out, they began to dance and sing in their flower pots.
Pip, pip, pip.
Bip, bip, bip.
Pip, 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 pip.
Flop, hop, hop, nip.
Pip, pip, pip.
Bip, bip, bip.
Pip, 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 pip.
Flop, hop, hop, nip. Oh.
Little Weed thought it was quite time they got up and went out into the garden to play, so she called out.
Weed, 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 weed.
Oh.
And the little flower pot men jumped out and looked for something to play with.
Oh.
And they saw the old pair of bellows the man had left lying on the ground.
Oh, Lord, heap. Oh.
Mmm.
They couldn't think what they were, so they tried to find out.
Oh.
Now, the man used the bellows to blow up his fire when it was getting low. But Bill and Ben didn't know that.
Oh. Hmm.
The one who was looking at the pointed end called out, "There's a little hole here."
Oh, tip, hop, hip, hop, hop, hip.
Hip, hop, hop.
Hmm.
The other one, at the other end of the bellows, tried to lift the handles.
Oh. Oh.
And suddenly, one of the handles came up and hit him right on the chin.
Oh, Papa the Chief. Oh.
He tried again, and the bellows blew out a great puff of air.
Oh.
Right in the other flower pot man's face.
Oh, roddle the pop, fap.
Waddle, noddle, diddle. Oh.
They were most surprised and wanted to find out what it was all about. The flower pot man lifted the handle again. And this time, the bellows made such a funny noise that Bill and Ben started laughing.
Funny.
And they thought that if they could find something else to make a different noise, it might sound like music, and they could play together just like a band.
Då kunde Fipes had a leak.
All right.
So one of them went to the shed to look for something that would make a noise, and the other one went on playing with the bellows. Then he heard a new kind of noise. And there was his friend coming back. And look what he'd found.
Hello.
A little tin of nails that made a sound like a rattle. And he had the end of a watering can, and he could blow it like a trumpet.
Klop.
Now, they were only thinking about how much they were enjoying themselves, and not at all about the poor old bellows. And they were very surprised indeed when the one on the bellows found himself tipped off.
Oh, deep.
And a huffy-puffy voice said,
That's enough. You're making me tired with all that nonsense. I'm quite out of breath. Waddle noddle, waddle teacup. Now I will show you what I can do without your help.
And the bellows began blowing and puffing at the flower pot man.
Oh. Oh. Oh.
And blew him right away.
Oh.
Then the bellows started to look for the other one who had made such a noise and jumped on him with his great big boots. And he chased him round until he got caught in a corner. And he had to climb up the trellis to get away. Then the bellows turned round, panting and blowing in a puffy sort of voice. Just then, old Slowcoach came along, and he thought the bellows looked rather cross and grumpy. So he said in his slow, tortoisey voice,
Is anything the matter?
The bellows looked at him.
They danced on me and made a noise.
Who danced on you?
Two things that came out of those two flower pots.
Then Slowcoach laughed.
They were only Bill and Ben.
And he began to sing Bill and Ben's song.
Oh, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben. Bill and Ben. Bill and Ben. Flower pot man.
Then, as he couldn't see Bill and Ben anywhere about, the bellows went back to the same place and lay down again. Now, all this time, the little weed had been watching, and she knew which of the flower pot men had danced on the bellows and made it angry. You listen, because little weed is going to ask a question.
Was it Bill or was it Ben danced upon the bellows then? Which of those two flower pot men? Was it Bill or was it Ben?
Was it Bill or was it Ben? It was Bill. It was Bill.
Oh, deep. He died up, eep, bip.
And when Ben came in, they both said hello to Slowcoach.
Hello, Slug-a-lug.
Hello, Slug-a-lug. Hello. You'd both better say you're sorry to the bellows.
So they went over to the bellows to say they were very sorry. They really didn't mean to be unkind to him.
Diddle-diddle-diddle on cuddle, bop.
And the bellows said,
That's all right.
Oh, Tala, very muddle.
Oh, tella.
When Bill and Ben found he wasn't cross anymore, they jumped up and down and started playing and dancing all over again. And this time the bellows blew harder than ever, and even old Slowcoach joined in, singing in his cracked old voice. They would have gone on playing, but they heard the little weed calling.
Oh.
She was telling them that the man who worked in the garden had finished his dinner, and she heard him coming down the garden path. So they said goodbye to old Slowcoach.
Baba, Slug-a-lug.
Bawa, Slug-a-lug.
Goodbye.
Then they said goodbye to the bellows.
Bawa, bop.
Baba, bip-up.
Goodbye.
They marched back, playing as they went. They jumped into their flower pots
Oh.
and said goodbye to each other.
Baba,
Bawa,
baba,
bawa,
baba.
bawa.
Then they said goodbye to the little weed.
Baba, dip-up, weep, weep.
Bawa, dip-up, weep.
The little weed stayed behind the flower pots and went fast asleep. And there they all were, lying quietly in the warm sunshine. But the man who worked in the garden never knew that anything had happened at all. Nobody knew about the flower pot men. Only you saw them playing. And the little weed. And I think the little house knew something about it. Don't you?
Goodbye, Bill. Goodbye, Ben. Bill and Ben, flower pot men. Goodbye, Bill. Goodbye, Ben. Bill and Ben, flower Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, flower pot men, flower pot men, flower pot men, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, flower pot men.
Once upon a time, there was a little house. And all round the house was a beautiful garden. And down at the bottom of the garden was a place where the man who worked in the garden left his things while he went into the house to have his dinner. One day, when he'd gone into the house to have his dinner, he left the garden very tidy because he'd cleared up and put all his things away. But there were the flower pots, as usual. 2 little ones, 2 middle-sized ones, and 2 great big ones. And just behind the big flower pots was a little weed. There they all were, lying quietly in the warm sunshine. The little weed looked all about her, and when she saw that everything was quiet, she leaned over towards one of the big flower pots and called out, "Weed! Weed!" And up came one of the little flower pot men, very slowly. He looked all round, then he went down again. Then the little weed leaned over towards the other flower pot and called out, "Weed! Weed!" And up came the other little flower pot man, very slowly. He looked all round. Then he went down again. The little weed called again. But the little flower pot men wouldn't come up because they felt rather grumpy. Sometimes people are rather grumpy in the morning, aren't they? Weed! Weed! And at last, up came the 2 flower pot men very slowly and grumpily. They said hello to each other.
Hard up, Pep.
Hard up, Pip.
Then they said hello to the little weed.
Hard up, Deep-Hop Weep.
Hard up, Deep-Hop Weep.
Weed.
Then they sat on the edge of their flower pots and began to grumble.
Nod-em-up, lood-up, flub-a-plop.
Dob-up-up.
Buckle-puddle-puddle-cut.
Oh, bottle, 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 bottle. Oh.
Then they got out of their flower pots and looked round for something to play with.
Oh.
But they couldn't find anything at all.
Not teacup.
Oh, no.
No watering can,
No.
no vegetables,
Not bubble.
No. Oh.
no spades or wheelbarrows,
Not splood or woodle.
No, no. Woodle, woodle. Oh.
nothing at all. They walked about kicking the ground and muttering. Nothing to play with, nothing at all.
Noddle to plow up, noddle at top.
Bottle, bottle. Noddle to plumb up, noddle the top.
Bottle. Noddle to plow up, noddle at top.
Bottle, bottle. Noddle to plumb up, noddle the top.
Bottle. No.
Oh, oh, diddle, 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 lollo.
Oh, noddle da. Oh, never diddle Oh, bottle.
Bottle. Oh.
Then one of the flower pot men got up and wandered into the shed, while the other one went on grumbling.
Oh, noddle to plow up, noddle at top. No, bottle. Oh, noddle to plow up, noddle at top. Oh, bottle.
Suddenly, the first flower pot man came rushing out of the shed, calling out to his friend to come and see what he'd found.
Goddle flop.
But the other one was sure he hadn't found anything.
Oh, hubba flubber tick.
Oh, your pop hop.
Oh, nuddle hubba.
Oh, your pop hop.
Well, he said, I can't see anything.
Wappa cuddle the tuck.
Then Ben told his friend that at the back of the shed was a little hole almost as big as the hen hole.
Deep pop, a bleep pop, da hip hop.
If they could crawl through the hole, they could get into a beautiful wood where there would be plenty of things to play with.
Oh, puddle a teacup flop up.
Oh, lubba lub, glubby glub, 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 glub.
They went into the shed so they could crawl through the hole. And when they came out the other side, they came to a place they'd never seen before. And they found themselves in a beautiful wood. And there they were, in the roots of some very big trees.
Oh, no, bleep trip.
Bleep trip.
Oh, rup, oh, bleep rup.
Bleep rup.
And they began to laugh because they were so happy to be in the wood. They ran about, looking at everything and playing on the big roots.
Oh, no.
Little lip.
Little nip. I'm up, I'm up, I'm up, I'm up, I'm up, I'm up.
So hop.
Then they began to sing. Trees to play in, leaves to play with, and roots to play on.
Trip-a-pop-pop, a rup-a-lop-trip, a little-little-little-little. Trip-a-pop-pop, a rup-a-lop-trip, a little-little-little-little.
All of a sudden, one of them bumped into a stick poking up from the ground. And a sticky sort of voice said,
"Do please look where you're going."
it was a stick man. The little flower pot men were most surprised, and they said they didn't see him, and they didn't know sticks could talk.
Oh, a little deep up.
Oh, a little nop, hiccup, top, more.
Then they saw that the stick didn't like being called a stick.
Huh, stick indeed.
And one of them said, perhaps he's not a stick at all. He looks like a little man.
Oh, lollipop mop.
Me pop mop.
And then the little man told them what he was.
I am part of the root of this beautiful tree. That is why I'm rather stiff. And who are you, I should like to know, for I've never seen anything like you in all my life.
Then they told him they were flower pot men, and they lived in flower pots.
Oh, a lip flop-a-pop-pop.
Meddle-pip, flop-a-pop.
And they told him their names.
A lip-pip.
Erlip-bip.
And the stick said,
Dear, dear me, and what may a flower pot be?
Only a flop-a-pop.
Oh, waddle-noddle.
but neither Bill nor Ben knew how to tell him what a flower pot looked like.
Saddle, bottle, bleep, lop, deep.
A shuttle, fuddle, a tot, lop deep.
But the little man couldn't understand what they meant, because he'd never seen a flower pot. And he said,
Never mind.
and although Bill and Ben pointed to themselves, he still said,
It's no good. I don't know what you mean, but I think you're very nice, whatever you are.
Dip.
Yep.
Then Bill and Ben asked him if he had a name, and he told them he had.
Hurry up.
Yes, I have. My name is Nubbly.
And the flower pot men began to laugh.
Oh, nubbly.
Oh, nubbly.
And soon they were dancing and singing, Nubbly, Nubbly is his name, from this great big tree he came.
Nubbly, nubbly, idly plop, idly lump pop, idly lump pop.
Trottle, girl, beep, trottle, leap, clop, idly lump, pom, pom.
Nubbly, nubbly, idly plop, idly lump pop, idly lump pop.
Trottle, girl, beep, trottle, leap, clop, idly lump, pom, pom. Oh,
When they were tired of dancing, Nubbly said,
I shall have to go back to my place in the roots of the big tree. Goodbye for now. Come again another day.
Well.
oh,
Bill and Ben were so excited because they'd found a new place to play in and a new friend to play with.
Nip flip, deploy wipe.
oh, nip, flip, oh.
And they thought they must go back at once and tell Little Weed all about it.
Lep, tap, eep, hop, weep.
Lip.
So they went back, past the big roots and past the big tree, and when they came to the hole, they scrambled through. All this time, the Little Weed had been waiting, and she knew everything. She knew which of the flower pot men had found the stick man. Now listen, because Little Weed is going to ask a question.
Was it Bill or was it Ben? Bumped into the stick man then. Which of those two flower pot men? Was it Bill or was it Ben?
Was it Bill or was it Ben? It was Ben! It was Ben!
Oh, what a little weedle. Oh, dear,
Then
dear.
out came Bill, and they both began to talk to the Little Weed.
Oh, we were trouble.
Oh, we want to shop.
Trouble holding a shop at your pop.
Oh, here they clap the hula up, you'll stop.
A bloody one.
But they were both talking so fast, Little Weed couldn't hear what they said.
Weed,
Oh,
So she made them go slowly, and they told her that they'd gone into the shed
We were little shop.
and crawled through the hole
oh, scroddle, trouble, hoop.
and played in the wood
He ploy, keep a hoop.
and found a new friend.
Dear fuddle, muddle, flip. Oh,
And his name was Nubbly.
Nubbly.
lovely. Oh,
And they began dancing and singing all over again. Nubbly, Nubbly was his name. From that great big tree he came.
Nubbly, nubbly, diddly flip. Diddly lump up, diddly lump up.
Trottle, got a beep, trolley, clop, idly lump, pom, pom.
Nubbly, nubbly, diddly flip. Diddly lump up, diddly lump up.
Trottle, got a beep, trolley, clop, idly lump, pom, pom.
They would have gone on dancing, but Little Weed called out. Because the man who worked in the garden had finished his dinner and was coming down the garden path. So they jumped into their flower pots
Oh,
and said goodbye to each other.
Papa.
Bob, bob.
Then they said goodbye to the Little Weed.
Papa. Keep up. Weed. Weed.
Oh, bob, bob, dip, pop, wee.
The Little Weed stayed behind the flower pots and went fast asleep. And there they were in the warm sunshine. But the man who worked in the garden didn't know that anything had happened at all. Nobody knew about the flower pot men. Only you saw them playing. And the Little Weed. And I think the little house knew something about it. Don't you?
Goodbye, Bill.